Hello and welcome to another EG Recap. I'm Jack Lindsay, and this one's going to be a little bit different. In today's episode, instead of covering a collection of news, I'm going to talk about a single article which has caused a bit of a controversy for Exclusively Games. Written by Mr. Luke Archer and currently sitting at 79 comments, which I believe is more comments than any article's ever gotten on this site. The article is titled Super Smash, It's Time for Melee Players to Move On. Now I'm also going to make this the title of today's episode, and I know that it will be for that title that many of you have clicked on the video and are now listening, in which case I bid you welcome. It's my understanding that the original article drew a disproportionate amount of external traffic, which means a lot of new readers, and by extension now, a lot of new listeners. So please do listen along as I go over the story, the reaction it created, and a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes here. Now, I've been told by many that I have a very calming voice, and that's fortunate in this case, because there is a lot of anger tied up in this one. So before I begin, let me just assure you, everything is gonna be A-okay. There's no need for that anger. It's not doing you any good. Let's see if we can't dispel some of it by the end of this. But to begin, Mr. Archer writes, Super Smash Bros. Melee released in late 2001 and is considered to be one of the greatest games ever released for the Nintendo GameCube, a sentiment that I would personally agree with. That is the first sentence of this article, and I want you to pay extra attention as I read the rest of the first paragraph. Melee is a fantastic game all around, and it's no surprise that it is as beloved as it is. Had it not been as successful as it was, it's very possible that the Super Smash Bros. Series could have ended there, but due to high sales figures and an incredibly passionate community, the series has continued to this day. In 2008, Nintendo released the sequel to Melee, Super Smash Bros. Brawl, followed by Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U in 2014, and most recently, 2018's Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Though each game in the series has had its own stretch of popularity, one of these games has stood out among the rest of them, the community more passionate than any other entry. That game, of course, is Melee, which despite being old enough to drive now, still remains just as popular as it was back in the day. And I think it's about time that everyone moved on from Melee. Make no mistake, Mr. Archer says, I think Melee is a great game. I grew up playing it, and it was literally the entire reason I had initially bought a GameCube back in the day. But it's time to move on, folks. I don't think that people should just stop playing it entirely, but I do think that it's time for the Melee superfans to stop acting like Melee is the only Smash game that matters, and stop insisting that the pro gaming community bend over backwards to accommodate them playing an 18-year-old game, which has had, in my opinion, definitively better games released in its series since then. At a competitive level, Melee is a very deep game, with tons of complex, high-level mechanics, most of which involve abusing glitches that probably would have been patched out as soon as they were discovered had the GameCube had any method to patch these games. Because only certain characters can take advantage of these glitches to their fullest extent, competitive Melee has very few characters being used in tournament matches. You will generally see the same 3 to 6 or so characters because the gap between the upper tiers and the lower tiers is so huge, and in my opinion, this has caused the game to become stagnant. Most of the characters aren't used, most of the stages are banned, and in the end, most matches are just the same thing over and over. The game has basically been solved in terms of mechanics, combos, and whatnot, so you rarely, if ever, see anything surprising unless a player makes a mistake. Does this make the game bad? Of course not, but it does make it incredibly boring to watch. But unfortunately, the biggest problem isn't the game itself, but the community. Perhaps due in part to Super Smash Bros. Brawl being not as nearly good as its predecessor. Melee's competitive community continued on even after its sequel's release. In fact, Melee's competitive community even went so far as to create a mod for Brawl called Project M that existed for no other purpose than to gut any of the undesirable mechanics from Brawl and make the gameplay as close to Melee as possible. The sequel was too different for them, so they hacked the game to make it more like the one they already liked, on top of still playing the one they actually liked in the first place. Though of course, even though Project M was designed to be Melee 2, it was never quite as popular as Melee itself was. While the rest of the competitive gaming community at this point was moving on to new games on new consoles, the Melee community insisted that their game was here to stay, and they needed special accommodations for their game. Even though every other competitive game had moved on to HD consoles and HD TV displays for their tournaments, Melee players insisted on playing on CRT TVs because the minuscule input lag on HD TVs was completely unacceptable for them, even though every other pro gaming scene just dealt with it. So tournament organizers were forced to lug around big old CRTs just for the Melee community, and due to the declining need for CRTs in today's high-definition world, it can occasionally be hard for them to find TVs that suit the Melee community's precise demands. I think that word describes the Melee community's problem perfectly. Demands. This is an important sentence. Remember this sentence. The Melee community demands that all their needs be followed exactly. Things must be done a certain way, and anything else is not acceptable. Everything must be played on CRT TVs, only GameCube controllers are allowed, only certain stages are allowed, Smash games other than Melee should not be considered to be as competitively serious as Melee, and so on. This is all despite the fact that most of the fighting game community as a whole does not respect nor consider Smash to be a fighting game at all. For the record, I do. And many major figures in the fighting game community are kind of sick of the childish behavior of the Melee community throwing around demands as if they were more important than anyone else in the competitive gaming community. But I think the biggest question here is why? Why is everyone so stuck on Melee in the first place? Why are they all stuck on an 18-year-old game that was designed to be silly random fun instead of moving on to games like Super Smash Bros. 4 and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which were designed partially with a competitive scene in mind and are actually considered to be really good? Other games that are played at a competitive level typically move on to the newest game as long as the game isn't a total mess in most cases. But Melee players seem to still demand to be center stage, and often complain when they aren't invited to big-name tournaments anymore. When the games were being announced for EVO 2019, the biggest fighting game tournament in the world, Melee found itself not being part of the main lineup of games. This caused, in my opinion, an unreasonable amount of outrage from the Melee community. There were even calls to have Super Smash Bros. Ultimate removed from the lineup and replaced with Melee because it wasn't as serious as Melee. This is an 18-year-old game. Quite frankly, they're lucky that they even managed to be at EVO last year. They're lucky that people are still around running major tournaments for the game at all. Sure, there's still tournaments around for lots of old games. There are even tournaments for games like Street Fighter 2 and Darkstalkers 3 happening now and then. But demanding that an 18-year-old game be played on the main stage in prime time at EVO is the very definition of entitled, in my opinion. And the sad part about the whole thing is that Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is legitimately a good game. The Melee community, the Smash Old Guard, are demanding that Ultimate be thrown under the bus in favor of their game, and it's pretty much entirely because it isn't exactly like Melee. If you want to argue that some newer versions of popular fighting games aren't worthy to have replaced the previous game at EVO, such as Street Fighter 5 or BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, in my opinion, then you better be sure that the game you're complaining about actually has something wrong with it, unlike Ultimate, which is arguably a better game mechanically than Melee. Again, this isn't saying that people should just stop playing Melee or having tournaments for it at all, but what I'm saying is that the Melee community needs to learn to understand that the fighting game community does not revolve around them, and it never has, despite what they would like to believe. People are going to want to move on to newer and better games, and Melee is not some objectively definitive Smash game that beats all others in every way. The game is dated, it's had its day in the sun, and it's time to move on. They need to stop demanding that they be included in major tournaments and stop acting like entitled children when they're not invited. And hey, Melee players, look on the bright side. Ultimate is great. If you'd actually put Melee down for a moment and give it a shot, you might actually be surprisingly pleased with it. Besides, you can't play Melee forever anyway. There are only so many working CRT TVs left in the world. I'm sure most people understand that last line was a joke, but there you have it. That is the article that has caused what I can only describe as an uproar. But before I get to some of the comments involved in that uproar, and trust me, we're gonna go over those, let me tell you what I think about Smash Brothers. I think Melee was the best damn one of all of them. That's right, I disagree with that aspect of the article. And you know what? That's okay. I'm not enraged by what Mr. Archer wrote. I'm not angered. I'm not even slightly bothered. The reaction you're going to see in these comments below, unfortunately, reflects on Melee fans. So I hope that I too can reflect on them in such a way that shows that we can disagree about which game is the best and which one we like the most, which one we feel should be taken the most seriously. We can have that conversation and also not lose our ever-loving minds. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm gonna have to censor myself as I read a lot of it, lest YouTube strike me down. But here we go. Oh, actually this first one and a few among the 79 are measured and well thought out disagreement. You gotta give credit where credit's due. But most of them, let's see. This article is an effing train wreck. Very disappointed in the people who decided this was okay to post. We do have some people pointing out the irony of the vitriol, considering that was one of the things that the author was complaining about. This is comically toxic journalism. You should be ashamed that you are given a platform and that this is how you use it. Now, for clarity's sake, this is not journalism. This was an opinion piece. That's why it wasn't in the news section. And Mr. Archer clarified with the phrase, "in my opinion," 6 times. Enjoyed the biased and out-of-touch article. That's actually pretty tame. Off base, out of touch, completely tone deaf. This article sounds like it was written by someone whose research consisted of reading comments on r Smash. I definitely won't be visiting this site again unless it starts hiring less incompetent writers. Someone believes there's no way Mr. Archer has ever watched Melee because he finds it boring. This article was a hit piece, no resemblance of decent journalism. What a effing stupid article. Remember this post when you look back at all your past mistakes, including your journalism career? You're an effing idiot, get off my feed. Jesus. Not gonna read that one, but you can imagine. Another 2-bit gaming journalist who's discovered that talking trash about games with dedicated fan bases is a good way to get clicks. It worked on me, I guess. Nothing to see here. Hilariously bad journalism. Truly a terrible article. What a disaster of an article. You have zero idea what you're talking about. Clickbait, pointless, waste of time. This article's effing garbage. Why would you write an article telling the scene not to exist? Bizarre and reflects poorly on the website. Let's say dog poop article, written to farm clicks by an uninformed author. Dumpster fire. You should have posted this tomorrow because it's the 9/11 of gamer takes. Here's the attention you wanted for that bad opinion. Can't believe this BS popped up on my phone. F this dumb A punk kid, eat poop pleb. Poop article. You can't kill Melee, even with your hurtful words. As Jeremy would say, this is a hilariously bad take. If I were a betting man, I'd take you up on that one, Vertigo. Good news for anyone looking to become a journalist. Retardation won't be holding you back. Crucify the bumbling idiot that wrote this ill-informed garbage. You're a hack. Imagine writing and posting this unironically. The headline sounds like something you'd hear from an SJW news outlet. Delete. I think that's my favorite one. Now that was just a quick skim, but you get the point. Now keep in mind, Mr. Archer started this article by talking about how much he loved Melee. He said he personally agreed with the sentiment that it was one of the greatest games ever released for Nintendo GameCube, and that it was the whole reason he bought a GameCube to begin with. He clarified multiple times he's not saying people should stop playing it or people shouldn't be into it anymore. He is simply of the opinion that there are better competitive options now in modern day within the same franchise, and he disagrees with people who complain and expect the competitive community to still play such an old game alongside the new ones. That's it. Now, by all means, you can disagree with that. I do. I don't disagree that people shouldn't act entitled or pitch a fit or any of that kind of behavior described, obviously, but I think it's fine to hold on to old games. There's an industry in this stuff. Blizzard recently remastered the first StarCraft because, believe it or not, there was a large group of players, primarily in South Korea, but all over the world too, who believed that it was a superior competitive experience to StarCraft 2, and things that were considered clunky limitations of the time, like only selecting 12 units or the way they'd bunch up and stumble all over each other, the way ramps would make your army into a bunch of imbeciles. They argued that it takes higher skill to navigate that than to be able to move your entire army in a death ball. And to them, watching StarCraft 2 is boring. And to the people that are into StarCraft 2, watching Brood War is boring. And it's okay. It's okay. There's no right answer there, it's personal preference. Some people think it's boring to watch Melee, and some people think the newer stuff is boring. And some people think Melee is more competitive, and some people think the newer stuff is more competitive, and it's fine. There's just no need. Look, just Melee fans. Luke Archer is one of you. He loves the game. He said as much. He's a gamer. He loves Look. Let's take a look here. Here's some articles he's written. 5 things I learned from playing Splatoon 2. That's a fun one. He was a complete newcomer to the game, and he jumped in and tried to get good and was getting his butt kicked and kind of taking notes about what worked and didn't work. The hero to ban or not to ban. This was a fairly thorough breakdown from a competitive scene point of view in modern Smash Bros. About this particular character. Top 8 greatest story scenes in the Final Fantasy series. I'm sure some of you also are into Final Fantasy. Well, guess what? He is too. You have more in common than not. Believe it or not, Luke Archer is on your side. 9 forgotten classic games that deserve a new entry. And look at that, he likes old stuff too. He likes old stuff so much he wants to see it brought into the modern times. This is a passionate gamer sharing his genuine opinions about video games. He wasn't doing it to farm clicks. He's doing it because it's the way he feels. And if you feel differently, that's all right. There's no need to say you're not going to visit the site anymore unless we hire better writers. There's no need for the hatred. You know, I guarantee you, if you happen to be at some sort of a public setup or party with a GameCube and there was Melee on and Luke Archer happened to be there too, that you guys would play the game together and have fun because you're both fans of it. And did you know that there were so many comments within such a short period of time that it overloaded our back end and people weren't able to post comments for a minute? And from what I heard, there was some sort of Reddit thread where people were freaking out and saying Exclusively Games is censoring us. Let's take a look right here, right now. It looks like I can leave a comment. It seems to be working fine now. Nobody... I can guarantee you, I see stuff from the back end. Nobody ever tries to prevent people from leaving comments. Who do you think approves these comments? Do you know how many comments I've personally approved from articles I wrote where I criticized Star Citizen and people were saying the same stuff about me that they're saying about Luke here? Probably like 1 million, because people can say what they want. I don't care. We don't care. Say what you want to say. That's not why I'm covering this. I'm covering it to clarify exactly what Mr. Archer was saying and hopefully add some context to what can be a reasonable discussion. You know, the funny thing is, the infighting among Smash Brothers fans between which game is more legitimate, all of that is a joke to fans of other fighting game franchises who don't even count you guys as being part of a real fighting game community. That's something to think about. And yeah, you get better response on CRTs. It's in the order of milliseconds, but you can feel it. Some people say it doesn't matter, and that's okay. Everything is okay. I promise you. If you made it this far in the video, this is what I want you to do. Longtime listeners and newcomers, lean back from your screen for a moment. Take a look around. What do you see? Are you home? Do you have a home? Do you see your walls and roof, your bed, your running water, your lights? Or are they going to be waiting for you when you come back from wherever you are? Let me tell you a story from my childhood, for those of you who might feel furious about this. I understand anger. I understand being on a hair trigger and seeing even the faintest whisper of conflict as an invitation to just unleash that pent-up rage. I get it. There is a lot of rage in being a young man, especially if you've been through loss. Not a lot of people know that. But once upon a time, when I was 12 years old, I used to live in Mexico City, and I was visiting a place called Coyoacán. And it was one of those days where the shafts of sunlight fall so golden that they look like you could reach out and touch them. I was walking under palm trees and past fountains. I heard music. It sounded like a flute. And I saw a wrinkled old man on the side of the street blowing on a folded leaf. And I heard laughter up ahead. And what I saw next has stayed with me anytime I ever felt that anger again. There were 2 men sitting side by side in the street. One of them had a single leg and a single arm. The other's limbs all ended at the joints except in one of his arms. And both of them were dressed in tattered, dirty rags. And between the 2 of them, they were passing back and forth a single sandwich, sharing bites. I couldn't understand the words they were saying, the stories they were telling each other. And maybe the words don't matter, because they were laughing, they were smiling. And in that moment, all my own rage, all my own discontent, it was disarmed. What I saw in those broken men seemed more whole than myself. I just thought I'd share that with you, share all of this with you, after seeing all the anger and finding it familiar. And to you, Mr. Archer, if you're listening, don't feel dissuaded from posting your opinion in the future, even if it's contentious. It's okay to disagree. Exclusively Games will never try to shut down disagreement, even if our relatively new systems get overloaded from it sometimes. And that'll about do it for today's recap. It'll be back to the news as usual tomorrow. Be sure to let me know what you thought of this deviation in style. I'm always listening. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time.